At this very moment, something within you is already responding, even before you fully understand why you are here. There is a kind of silence that does not come from the outside world, but from a deeper place within awareness itself. It appears when everything else becomes less convincing, when distractions lose their weight, and when the noise of life no longer fully explains what you are feeling inside. And if you are listening right now, it may be because something in you is beginning to recognize that what you have been searching for was never truly distant. It was only hidden beneath constant movement, constant thinking, constant reaching for something that always seemed just beyond your grasp. What if that distance was never real? What if what you have been calling emptiness was actually a space of presence that was never understood, only overlooked? Stay here with this question, because what follows is not just information. It is a gradual unfolding of perception itself. There is a moment where everything you believed was missing begins to shift in meaning, not because something external changes, but because your perception stops running away from what is already here. This is not about adding something new to your life. It is about noticing what has always been quietly present underneath every experience you have ever had. A kind of awareness that does not depend on circumstances, emotions, or mental clarity to exist. And the more you stay with this, the more you begin to realize that much of your inner restlessness was never actually about lack. It was about not recognizing the space in which everything was already unfolding. That space has no sound, no form, no demand. Yet it is the very field in which every thought appears, every feeling arises, and every moment takes shape. It does not compete with your experience, it holds it. And in this recognition, something subtle begins to soften within you. The urgency to find peace elsewhere starts to lose strength, because peace is no longer imagined as a destination. It becomes something closer than breath, closer than thought, closer than effort, and for the first time, emptiness no longer feels like absence, but like something quietly alive. Something begins to change in the way you relate to your own thoughts, not by trying to control them, not by resisting them, but by noticing that they are not as central as they once seemed to be. There is a quiet shift where thinking continues, but it no longer defines the totality of your inner world. Thoughts arise, move, and dissolve, yet something in you remains untouched by their movement. It is not separate from them, but not limited by them either. And in that space, a deeper form of stillness becomes noticeable. Not the absence of thought, but the absence of identification with thought as the center of who you are. This is where the experience of emptiness begins to transform again. What once felt like a gap or a void starts to reveal itself as a kind of openness. Not empty in the sense of lack, but open in the sense of allowing everything to appear without resistance. And as this openness becomes more familiar, you begin to sense that nothing in your experience has ever been outside of it. Every moment, every sensation, every silence has always been occurring within the same silent presence that does not move, even as everything else does. And in that recognition, something within you becomes quietly at ease, not because awareness disappears, but because the idea that awareness needs to be maintained starts to lose its meaning. What remains is a natural presence that does not require attention to exist. It is already here before attention moves toward anything, and it remains here after attention shifts away. And in this realization, something very subtle becomes clear. You were never actually stepping in and out of presence. You were only shifting between recognizing it and overlooking it. The presence itself was never interrupted. This changes the entire way experience is understood. Life is no longer something you enter or exit mentally. It is simply what is happening and it is always happening within the same unbroken field of being. Even the idea of emptiness begins to lose its emotional charge. It is no longer interpreted as something missing or incomplete. It becomes another expression of the same openness in which everything appears without resistance. And in this openness, nothing needs to be fixed, because nothing was ever truly broken, not because clarity has been fully achieved, but because the need to constantly evaluate whether clarity is present starts to fade. Something more immediate begins to take its place, something that does not require confirmation or interpretation in order to be real. And in that immediacy, life becomes less of a concept to be understood and more of a direct experience to be lived. The mind may still interpret, but it no longer feels like the authority over what is real. It becomes just another movement within a much larger field of awareness that is already complete in itself. This is where the sense of emptiness undergoes another transformation. It is no longer seen as a gap between you and fulfillment. It becomes recognized as the very space in which fulfillment is possible at all. Without this space, nothing could appear, nothing could be experienced, nothing could be known. And in that recognition, emptiness is no longer feared or resisted. It is understood as openness itself, the silent foundation of every moment you have ever lived. And in that understanding, something within you rests more deeply than before. There is a subtle moment where even the idea of progress begins to lose its grip on your perception. Not because life stops unfolding, but because the measurement of where you are compared to where you think you should be starts to dissolve. And without that comparison, something very simple becomes visible. You are always, only ever here. In this here, nothing is ahead of you in the way the mind once imagined. The future still appears as thought, but it no longer carries the weight of being a place where something essential must finally arrive. And the past still exists as memory, but it no longer defines the depth of what is present now. What remains is a continuity that does not require improvement to be complete. It is not static, yet it does not depend on movement to feel whole. Everything changes within it, but nothing is missing from it. And as this becomes more clear, the sense of emptiness transforms once again. It is no longer interpreted as something waiting to be filled. It becomes the very openness that allows all change to be experienced without resistance. And in that openness, there is a quiet sense of rest that does not depend on conditions. Not because life becomes meaningless, but because meaning is no longer something you have to extract from experience in order for it to feel valid. Instead, experience begins to stand on its own, complete in its immediacy, without needing to be translated into something else to be understood. And in this shift, something subtle happens in the background of awareness. You start to notice that meaning was never missing from life. It was only being filtered through expectation, interpretation, and the constant need for mental confirmation. When that filtering quiets down, reality becomes more direct. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer determine the depth of what is being lived. Emotions still move through you, but they no longer define the totality of your inner state. And in that directness, the sense of emptiness changes again. It is no longer experienced as something waiting for purpose. It becomes the open space in which all experience is already meaningful without needing explanation. And in that realization, life is no longer something to be understood before it can be lived fully. It is already fully lived in its very appearing, not because depth has been reached as a final destination, but because the idea that there are layers of reality standing above or below what is already here starts to lose its meaning. What you are looking for is no longer felt as something hidden behind experience, but as something fully present within it. And in this recognition, attention begins to settle in a different way. It is no longer driven by curiosity that assumes something is missing. Instead, it begins to rest in what is already unfolding without needing to extract anything additional from it. This is where perception becomes unusually simple. Life is no longer divided into superficial and profound moments. Everything begins to carry the same quiet completeness, whether it is ordinary or unexpected, silent or noisy, comfortable or uncertain. And in this simplicity, the sense of emptiness transforms again. It is no longer associated with distance or lack. It becomes the very openness that allows depth to be experienced at all, without ever needing to be entered or achieved. And in that openness, there is nothing to reach, because nothing was ever outside of it. Not because life loses direction, but because the idea of a separate traveler moving through experience starts to feel less and less real in direct perception. What remains is experience itself, unfolding without a central figure that owns it or moves through it. And in this shift, something very simple becomes undeniable. Thoughts still arise, decisions still happen, emotions still move, but none of it requires a separate you standing apart from it in order for it to be known. This realization is not dramatic. It is quietly stabilizing. It removes the constant pressure of needing to position yourself correctly within life. There is no longer a need to define where you are on a path, because the path itself was always just a way of thinking about what is already happening. And in this clarity, emptiness takes on its final transformation in this sequence. It is no longer perceived as absence, or openness, or even potential. It is simply seen as the absence of separation between awareness and what appears within it. And in that recognition, nothing is left to resolve, because nothing was ever divided to begin with. Not because awareness disappears, but because the idea of someone actively noticing awareness begins to lose its structure. What remains is not a process being observed, but direct presence without any sense of distance between what is here and what is known. And in this directness, experience no longer feels like something happening to a subject. It is simply happening, without separation, without interpretation dividing it into parts. The mind may still arise, but it no longer creates the illusion of a center standing apart from life. This is where everything becomes extremely simple, not simplified by thought, but naturally undivided in itself. There is no longer a need to step back from experience in order to understand it. Understanding and experience are no longer two different movements, and in this simplicity, emptiness reveals its final meaning in this unfolding. It is not a state, not a feeling, not a concept. It is the absence of division between what is aware and what appears within awareness. Nothing outside, nothing inside, nothing separate. And in that recognition, what remains is not something new, but what was never absent. Not because experience disappears, but because the boundary that once separated inner from outer no longer holds any real weight. What remains is a single, continuous reality in which everything is simply appearing without needing to be placed inside or outside of anything. And in this continuity, something very subtle becomes undeniable. The sense of being located at a center, looking out at life, begins to fade. Not through effort or practice, but through clear seeing that such a center was never actually found in direct experience. What replaces it is not another perspective, but the absence of the need for one. Life is no longer filtered through a point of reference that claims ownership over it. Instead, there is only what is happening, fully present, without fragmentation. And in this absence of division, emptiness reveals its final clarity. It is not a void, not a space, not a concept. It is simply the lack of separation between awareness and appearance, between knowing and what is known. And in that recognition, nothing remains to be completed, because nothing was ever apart. Not because clarity is lost, but because the need for something to be recognized as separate from what is already present no longer arises. What remains is so immediate that it does not require confirmation, reflection, or awareness of itself as an object. And in this immediacy, experience is no longer divided into observer and observed. There is only what is, unfolding without distance, without interpretation, creating layers of separation. The mind may still function, but it no longer defines the structure of reality as something split between here and there. This is where everything becomes completely natural, without effort or construction. There is no position to hold, no state to maintain, no insight to preserve. Reality does not need to be stabilized, because it was never unstable. And in this final clarity, emptiness loses even its name. It is no longer something to understand or describe. It is simply the absence of division, the quiet fact that nothing has ever been apart from what is. And in that, there is only this, without beginning and without end. Not because time stops, but because the mind's way of dividing experience into past, present, and future no longer dominates perception. What remains is not a point in time, but a seamless continuity in which everything is already included without separation. And in this continuity, something very simple becomes clear. Nothing in experience is actually arriving from anywhere or going anywhere. Thoughts appear and disappear, sensations arise and fade, but all of it is happening within the same indivisible field of awareness that does not move, even as everything within it does. At this stage, the sense of emptiness is no longer meaningful even as a concept. It cannot be described as space, absence, or openness anymore, because all of those imply a reference point. Instead, what is recognized is that there was never anything standing apart from awareness in the first place. And in that recognition, nothing is left outside of what is here. No distance, no separation, no missing part waiting to be found. Only the simple fact of presence, already complete, already whole, without needing to become anything else. Not because anything becomes incomplete, but because the mind no longer feels the need to measure experience against the concept of wholeness. What remains is prior to comparison, prior to evaluation, prior to the thought that something could ever be missing in the first place. And in this absence of comparison, reality no longer feels like something that needs to be understood in order to be valid. It is self-evident in its appearing, requiring no explanation to confirm its existence. Everything is simply here, exactly as it is, without the need for correction or refinement. At this point, even the sense of realization fades, because realization implies a before and after, a shift from ignorance to understanding. But what is seen now does not belong to that structure. It was never absent long enough to be found. And in this recognition, there is nothing left to resolve, nothing left to achieve, nothing left to return to. Not because something has been gained, but because nothing was ever lost. Only presence remains, unqualified and uninterrupted. Not because presence is gone, but because the mind's attempt to define it as something that remains alongside something else no longer applies. What is here is not one thing persisting through time, but the absence of any division that would allow something to leave or arrive. And in this clarity, even language begins to feel like a temporary gesture, pointing towards something that does not require pointing. Every word, every attempt to describe, was only ever an echo of what is already immediately evident before thought arrives. What is revealed here is not a new state, not a refined awareness, not a final understanding. It is simply the end of the assumption that reality was ever split into separate parts, needing to be brought together. And in that ending, there is no dramatic conclusion. Only the quiet recognition that nothing was ever outside of what is. No distance, no separation, no remainder. Only what has always been, before any question ever appeared.